We are recording MassCom 105, Diversity in Media, the last class meeting during the fall semester 2020, a very historic year. In our first discussion in this part one, we have two very special guests, former students and advisees of mine here in the School of Journalism and Mass Communications at San Jose State. So my class and I, we welcome Devin, Fehely, and Kiet. Gentlemen, how are you today?
I'm good. As I mentioned, I am trying to remember how to snowboard and not break my neck or my ankle or anywhere in between. But I'm having a good time today.
That's
Glad to be.
Good idea. Kiet, how are you doing?
I just got off of work and I am in a good mood, and I cannot believe that we are here on your last day, Bob. I cannot believe it.
It's hard for me to even grasp it. I was up all night thinking, what am I going to say? What are we going to do? And I'm like, oh, they know me. I'll just wing it. So let's just do that. Guys, I want to start off by asking our guests about the news. We just got a text from one of your competitors, by the way, that Governor Newsom plans to issue a stay-at-home order for the state of California. That's extraordinary. That means we are in a worse situation here on December 3rd than we were back in March and April. Any thoughts that you can share with the class about what this does, what this news does for your news operation? What do you guys expect to be doing tonight, tomorrow, this weekend?
Kiet, you can go. You can jump in first since you just got off work.
We are working remotely, and we're kind of going back to how things were back in March. So from an operational standpoint, things just plow right along, and you will not notice anything on the air. But behind the scenes, it is definitely in emergency mode right now.
I can imagine. And Devin, your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually have the benefit of being off this week, but my situation is a little bit different than Kiet's in the sense that I kind of have a foot in two worlds. So I report in the South Bay like he does and work remotely. And in many ways, we've been doing that for years. And it was something that I think really kind of set us up to be successful and very adaptable to this sort of the safety measures within this pandemic, because we have operated kind of with a model of self-sufficiency for a long time. We didn't necessarily need a photographer to do our job. We didn't have to, we could send our stories in remotely. And so a lot of that doesn't change. I also go up on the weekends to anchor the morning show. And so I go into the building. They've had a lot of protocols in place to try to keep the virus out of the building itself. A lot of our anchors have worked remotely from home when possible. I go in, my co-anchor goes in, the weather person goes in. And we had a setup that we actually liked quite a bit, in which we were still all in the same studio, but we were 15 or 20 feet apart from each other. Myself on the main desk, my co-anchor on a secondary news kind of set off to the side, and then our weather guy on the weather set. And just recently they changed that and said, no, we don't want all those people in there, even though you're 15 or 20 feet apart. We need you on different floors. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a constant adjustment for sure on a work level. I will say this, just in terms of how is the public going to react to this? I think that there is a deep sense of fatigue. I think that there's a lot of people in the public that feel I made, weeks and months of sacrifice in the early days of the pandemic. And it's got to be very dispiriting to those folks to feel like in December, almost 9 months into this, we're as bad as we've ever been and we're going backwards. And I think, one of the things that cannot be ignored is if you're going to tell people they have to stay at home, if you're going to tell people they can't work, I almost think you have an obligation to help replace the livelihood that they're losing. Because if you don't, people will literally starve and eventually will fall behind on their rent. And I think there will be a lot of anger, far more than we've seen, bubble up to the surface if the lockdown isn't paired with some kind of economic assistance to the people that are essentially put out of work by it. That's my thoughts.
All of your points are very well taken, and I thank you for that. Devin, you got me thinking, though. Last night I was listening to NBC. Brian Williams used a line that I wanted to share with the class. The situation has gotten this worse. One person dies every 30 seconds from this virus right now in the United States. So Devin, while I understand what you just said, and I tend to agree with what you just said, I'm going to play devil's advocate and say, we have to stop giving fatigue an excuse for us. People are dying, and this is serious. The Thanksgiving holiday had 8 million people traveling when we were told not to do that. We have the freedom of choice in this country, and now we're going to have the freedom to suffer in this country by our own action. Isn't there some responsibility for the media to tell the public, hey, you got part of the blame here too, folks?
Okay, so I think one of the things that's been really challenging for people is the feeling that as the situation worsens, as cases rise, that things get shut down or things get closed that have little or a tenuous connection at best to how the virus is spreading. In my opinion, the challenge is the way in which the virus is spreading is not necessarily in outdoor dining or shopping at a grocery store. It is spreading socially. It's spreading every time you spend any amount of time indoors without a mask with another human being that's not in your immediate household or family. And the challenge is that's the hardest part to police. So I think, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm against public health orders. I'm not saying that the situation isn't dire. I'm saying curbing the actual behaviors that are spreading the virus are increasingly difficult because it's happening, in my opinion, in what is essentially our personal sphere, our homes, our backyards, our apartments, and that is very difficult to regulate the behavior inside someone's house. That's just me being a pragmatist.
I'll tell you, at least from a journalist standpoint, what we can do is tie stories to these numbers of deaths and people getting sick. And a big challenge to that is that hospitals don't let us in.
I think you're muted.
Oh my gosh, I am. Okay, sorry. I think a big part of our role as journalists, how we can change the debate and change people's thinking is to tie personal stories to these numbers. Because you hear a person dying every 30 seconds, and that's all you see are numbers. And a big part of the challenge is getting access to those people, to those stories. Because I see and hear from around me, that's what really moves people, is when they can put a face to the suffering. And I think we need to do more of that, because right now it's just the people who are complaining about this being hard, they're getting all the airtime and FaceTime. And we really need to dig down deeper if we really want to show the impact of this. The picture of in Texas of those inmates loading stacks of bodies in those trucks, that gets people's attention, and that's what we need to do more of.
Interestingly enough, so the public health department in Santa Clara County has a spokesperson who's really good, someone we've known in other roles over the years. And I told him, I feel like maybe a month, six weeks or so ago, I was like, I just want to plant a seed of an idea of something that I think would actually be really sort of beneficial to you guys, to us, to the public. I said, I know that there are protections, that there's privacy protections that are in place for people that, go to a hospital and survive this thing. But I think that you guys should find a way, once people have recovered, to see if there was a willingness for them to describe that experience. Because we've heard some of it, but we haven't heard nearly enough. And I think, for myself, the two things that have kind of made me be extraordinarily cautious during this time. One is just the acknowledgement that you don't know how sick you're going to get until you get it. You know, you might reasonably able to say by age or fitness or general health, I'll probably be okay, but you just don't know. You know, you certainly hear the stories about people that were young or in good health that, you know, really got it really badly. And then also, as Bob knows, and for the last 6 months, my dad's been battling cancer. And so the last thing that I wanted to do was to bring it to him. But I think for a lot of people, there's just a sense of unreality because they don't know someone personally that's been touched by it. And I think, like Kiet said, those stories, finding a way to, you know, to put those stories forward more often, I think would give people a greater sense of the reality of this and the inherent risk and danger of it as well.
Well, Devin,
Let me jump in real quick here. So in California, there is a state law that allows reporters to go anywhere they want to in a wildfire, and that's because of the immense public interest in a natural disaster. And because natural disasters are not crime scenes, there's no reason to keep media out. So it is written into our state law that reporters can go virtually anywhere. And so because of that, now you have dramatic video, people's stories from inside the fire line, and now everybody gets it, how dangerous fires are. We don't have that kind of access in the hospital. If we did, those stories would get out and people would behave much differently.
excellent points, guys. And I want to remind the class, both of these gentlemen are former students of ours in our School of Journalism. Both of them were participants in our student media, Spartan Daily and Update News. So be thinking about that because some of you are members of our student media. Gentlemen, I want to go back to something that Devin opened the door to. Today, we're supposed to talk about some disability issues in the media. Devin, I know your family. I love your mom and dad very much. I'm really glad to see he's doing better. Can you describe a little bit how challenging it's been for you and your family, but then tie it into what does that mean for your work and how you can stay focused doing two things at once?
Yeah, so very briefly, in May of this year, my father was diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma. It was a gut punch. We had noticed some health issues in the weeks preceding that diagnosis, but that actual diagnosis was pretty devastating because at that point in time, it's very difficult to not sort of leap to the worst case scenario. Is he going to celebrate another birthday? At that point, he was 79, turned 78 in the middle of treatment. Would he be here for Thanksgiving? Would he be here for Christmas? Now, it looks like the cancer is in remission. Fingers crossed on that. But it has been one of the most difficult things that I have ever dealt with in my life. It's very challenging to see your father, who for the entirety of your life has been strong and self-sufficient and a provider and a protector, really be so weak that he needed, assistance to get up and down stairs and, sometimes help with self-care and all of those things. For the last 6 months, my life really has been organized around two things. It's been organized around work, and it's been organized around family and supporting my dad specifically and my mom, more broadly as we've all gone through this. It's challenging. It's challenging to live with that uncertainty, with sadness, with the dread. So it's been very difficult. It's been very trying, for sure.
And your family is fantastic, and I certainly continue to pray and support you. And you and I talked a lot about this. Kiet, I'm going to bring you back into the conversation and say, family matters. You're a family man. You have children. The challenges that you face and trying to still keep up this crazy job. What are some of the things that you're up against, as well as doing what you do on television?
So I have a 14-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son. Um, just how everything is with online learning and making sure that they just kind of their immediate needs are met. Also, that they're making sure that they're getting educated and so that they're not falling behind. And then dealing with a young teenage daughter. Um, that has been a very interesting process. And making sure kind of overall that I'm raising like a decent human being. That's kind of the foundation of what drives me. And I always tell them that I'm preparing them for the day when I'm not going to be here, that they're going to have to make these decisions on their own. I am constantly pushing them to be independent, to make their own choices, to get out in the world, to be confident. And that's like I feel like that's my other big job outside of this. I feel like this I've got pretty well figured out. But being a dad, like there is no there was no manual for that, and there's a lot of trial and error. But it's also immensely rewarding, and it can be very trying at times. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. But yes, balancing that. It's just it's what we do. It's the chosen life that we picked for ourselves.
Very good, gentlemen. I'm very proud of you. You both are doing a wonderful thing for your families. We're going to open it up to questions in just a minute, but I want to ask both of you now, since you're TV journalists, to do this in 2 minutes. Give the class a little background on your history with San Jose State journalism, why you got into this profession, and then later on in our second half, we'll talk about the connection between you and I. But first, talk about how did you get into this crazy business? And Mr. Emmy Award winner, let's start with the first one, Kiet. And you are muted, so you're not telling us.
All right, reclaiming my time. I like science, I like people, and so I figured the best way to combine that, and I like public speaking, so I figured early on was to be an on-camera meteorologist. I started going down that path, and then I figured I better have a backup plan, and that's when I transferred to San Jose State, and I figured I'd get also a major in journalism as well, and that's when I met Bob Rucker. And I realized that journalism was going to be way more fun than any kind of desk job that you could have out there. So I first met Bob in 1997. And from there, it just kind of took off. I won the Hearst Award in 1999. And then I got my first job in 2000 in New Mexico. Stayed there for 5 years, went to Atlanta, stayed there for 3 years, and I've been here in the Bay Area for the past almost 13 years now. So I'm coming up on 21 years in the business. And why I do this, I love speaking truth to power, holding people who are elected officials, holding them accountable. I like giving voice to people who have none. And when I see an injustice or a wrong, I like to try and fix it.
Very good. And Kiet, I'm going to hold on to you one more time and ask you to talk a little bit about that special report you did in 2000, I believe it was 14, about the fall of Saigon. Tie that into your cultural history for this class.
So I was born on April 30th, 1975, and that is the fall of Saigon. That is the last day of the Vietnam War. And that is akin to being born on 9/11, basically. It's a hugely significant and very sad day for the Vietnamese community. And it's really kind of strange that I was born on that day. So every day for, Vietnamese people call my birthday the day we lost our country. And that's how I get introduced to all friends and family. Oh, here's our son, Kiet. He was born on the day we lost our country. So it's kind of a weird time every time it comes around that I'm able, being Vietnamese and being a reporter and living in both of these worlds, and living in San Jose that has the highest Vietnamese population of any city outside of Vietnam. It's very interesting to be able to be in this position that I can look back on how far we've come as a people here in San Jose, and how far we have yet to go. And so for the 40th anniversary, that was a great time to be able to look back on the Vietnamese community, how things have changed. And it was a huge responsibility. It was a huge honor to do so, because here I am trying to sum up 4 decades of history, of my own people's history, of my own family history. And I got months to do this project, and it was a great, great honor. And I was able to really kind of dive in and tell those kinds of stories in a way that I've never been able to before.
Very good. And I just want to make sure students caught that beginning award in college. The William Randolph Hearst Foundation, the same people that we gave the award to Dr. Anthony Fauci to, Kit Doe in 1999 was selected as the best television journalism student in the United States. Congratulations, sir. Let's go to the other guy in the room, and he's got a collection of gold. Why don't you talk to us about your life, Devin?
Yeah. So the way that I got into journalism, I'll just kind of shorten the story down, and I'll tell the story of my meeting of Bob later, per your suggestion. But basically, I got really into still photography when I was in college. I originally got my degree from Brown University in psychology, but I worked for the student newspaper there, for the Brown Daily Herald, as a still photographer. And then once I graduated, I was trying to figure out what I really wanted to do. There was at least 3 different potential career paths, but I felt that I wanted to pursue journalism. I felt like if I pursued journalism, and then decided to pivot towards the other things that I had considered, they would still be there for me. But I sort of figured if I waited to do journalism, it would be unlikely that I would kind of go back to it later in life. And so when I came home to San Jose and went to San Jose State, started initially at the Spartan Daily, because I said, if I want to make a career of this, I think I would like to be a reporter as opposed to, a photographer. I met Bob. I'll tell that story later. He said, well, what about TV? And it was really sort of a life-changing moment. It was not something that I had thought of before. But I'm really grateful to him because it gave me a career. I love the medium in which Kit and I work. I love the fact that it involves videography and reporting and words and the marriage of all of those things, and sort of trying to figure out the best way to mix those, in terms of the visuals and the narration and the storytelling. Broadly, I think of myself as a journalist, but I would say that more specifically, I'd like to think of myself as an investigator and a storyteller. And I think, across my career, the stories that I've done that have gotten some recognition kind of combine those two things, or highlight at least one of those two things, either investigations or kind of more in-depth feature reporting. And I love it. Bob is always nudging Kit and I both to think about life beyond television. And I think the reason he hasn't had too much success yet is because we just love it still. We're really, probably as passionate about it as we were when we were students, when it was all new to us. But, it's just something that we love.
Well, I'm not in favor of leaving anything that you love, so hang in there as long as you can. And Devin, I always lose count. How many are there? How many Emmys have you won?
I have 14.
14.
14.
14.
Yes.
Wow. That's incredible.
Ask him how many Murrows he has.
Oh, yes. William Edward R. Murrow Awards. How many of those?
I think I have 7. Yeah, I think I have 7. 7.
Wow. And I know I have custody of one of your Emmys. Go ahead, Kit.
6, but I think it's 7. No, it's 7. Yeah, 7. Sorry.
Okay, now you're just rubbing it in. Okay, very good. No, but I love that. I think it's fantastic. It's time to open it up and let students ask some questions for the next 20 minutes. So I'm going to ask everybody, jump in quickly. We don't have much time. Ask them what you'd like. Just jump in right now.
I have a question. Hi, thank you guys for coming. And this is question for both of you guys. What's one thing that you remember in Bob's class that will always stick with you guys?
See, I only think
Apparently nothing.
well, no. I only think I took one. I think I took diversity, and what I remember most about it was that. So I was a little bit different. So I was essentially kind of a graduate student since I had an undergraduate degree. I took the media class, and honestly, Bob was kind of like my idol. He was like a rock star, and I just remember just not wanting to screw up and just, do a good job, because it was really important to me to sort of maintain the esteem I think that he felt for me. But he got me to always kind of talk about, I'm biracial. He always sort of wanted me to sort of talk about kind of having a foot in two different worlds. My mom is African American. My dad is white, and so he was always kind of curious about that, and encouraged me to sort of discuss that kind of unique identity, I guess would be how I'd answer the question.
For me, the one thing that sticks out of what Bob teaches you is shame and disappointment are very strong motivators. Because, okay, Bob, he has high expectations for you. And that is, that's kind of a teacher's job. And so when somebody believes in you, invests that kind of energy in you, you don't want to let them down. And if you find a teacher that does that, it is a strong thing, because sometimes you don't believe in yourself, and when somebody else believes in you, that is a very powerful thing, and you don't want to let them down.
Keep going, folks. Come on.
I was going to ask, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Amanda. So my question is, over the years, because you've both had very long careers in journalism, how has your kind of topics of stories have changed? Like, basically, like if you were saying like, oh, I did a lot of stories on education, then I moved on to this, and then this, and this is how it changed because my life was like this at this point, etc.
I think for me, okay, so what's going to happen is if you go into this career, and if you go into any career, actually, the people around you are going to get a sense of what you like to do and what you're good at. And so then you're going to naturally invest more time and energy in those things that you're good at and that you do well, and people say that you do well. And then those projects will tend to be steered in your direction. So at least for me at KPIX, they know that I have an affinity for kind of weird, quirky stories that might lend themselves to more reporter involvement, that need a little bit more reporter personality. They know that I like stories about tech, and they know that I like stories about adventure, anything kind of outdoorsy. And they know that I like stories that are physically kind of hard to do. And so, you kind of develop a reputation for yourself in that regard. And they know that we all like a good story with a strong character and strong moments. So that's kind of over time. That's what I've been drawn to, and those are the kind of stories that I tend to do more of, or try to do more of these days.
He's also quite a daredevil, and we used to have to rein him in because I was afraid we were going to get sued while he was a student in college. We'll talk more about that later. More questions.
So I was going to ask, you said that human stories are very important, especially in a pandemic and in a disaster like this. I've always heard there's this old saying, go find the gravedigger, or go, you have to find somebody who's in the trenches who people have not heard from yet. And I'm wondering how you go about finding those sources, finding someone whose relative has died of COVID, or who's lost their entire family, or who's a nurse in the trenches. How do you go about finding those sources and getting them to talk to you and sit down and tell their story?
Well, I think one of the things that you want to do is you want to keep your ears open. Now, our news director, because Kiet and I, as you both know, work for the same station, same news director. So our news director will say like a mantra that he wants real people in the story. And Kiet will sometimes facetiously say, as opposed to the unreal people that we people our stories with, other times. But what he's saying is, he doesn't want to hear just from officials. He wants to hear from the people that are being affected by something. And what I've tried to do is kind of keep some people in my back pocket for stories, you know, that might be people that I turn to periodically as things change. There was, so for example, just very quickly, there was a gentleman that I met very early in the pandemic. He worked kind of behind the scenes at the convention and visitor, the convention center in San Jose. And as you can imagine, that's an industry, who knows when that's going to come back. He went from making like $150,000 a year to basically zero with no prospects anywhere on the horizon. And, you know, he was someone that reached out to us initially, but he was gracious and he was articulate and he was, you know, intelligent and thoughtful. And so I maintained a relationship with him so that when, you know, for example, the additional federal benefits ran out and people were then, you know, really kind of struggling with what amounts to essentially poverty wages, probably not enough to pay your rent or your food. You know, he was someone that I checked back in with during that time because I knew that he was going to be adversely affected. And so I think you have to kind of have a sense of, you know, who are some of these people, maintain that relationship, cultivate that relationship, and then you can turn to them when you have a story that's applicable. And just really quickly, I think sometimes you have to just have an open mind and you have to keep your ears open. One of the stories that I did a couple of years ago was about a 100-year-old female pilot. And that wasn't the original story that I was doing. The story that I was assigned, you know, for a day turn was about the lack of diversity, gender diversity specifically, in the field of aviation. And so I talked to this female pilot who in the course of that interview mentioned that in the upcoming weekend, she was going to be celebrating the 100th birthday of this woman who was a female pilot and an inspiration to a lot of local female pilots. And they were going to give her sort of a flight in commemoration of her 100th birthday. And my ears perked up. I was like, that's an awesome story. This woman was an amazing interview. She was a pilot until she was 94. And she finally decided, you know what, I don't think I have the strength and the coordination to do this anymore. But she still loved flying and still would fly, you know, with her fellow female pilots as often as she could. So I think you just have to be receptive and open when somebody tells you a little bit of a story that may not be the focus of what you're doing today, but you might want to say, you know what, let me make sure I stay in touch with you because I think that's a good story to tell at some future point.
We have about 10 minutes left in this segment. Keep going, folks.
Mr. Doe, my question's for you. So you talked about how you like to go into like dangerous situations, you know, you're kind of a daredevil, and I'm kind of the same way. So what's like the most dangerous situation that you've been in where you were kind of like, oh, this isn't good, and how did you maintain your like cool through it?
My daredevilness has certainly shifted in perspective after having kids and also having a mortgage to pay. That certainly changes your opinion about a lot of things. Because, you know, if you get hurt or you get sick, then that is certainly that can be a lot of financial pressure on you. The most dangerous is, at least for us, is wildfires. And I also work with a kind of a daredevil photographer who is more than willing to drive deep into these fires. And, you know, it was just like maybe 2 months or so ago where we were on a road and fire was burning on both sides of us. And then, which is not a big deal. And then a shift in smoke came, and next thing you know, I was completely engulfed in smoke, and it was dark. And I could feel the heat through the window. And I mean, I don't say a lot to myself very often, but I was like, holy shit, like this might be it. So so then, you know, you always have a backup plan, especially in situations like this. What am I going to do if this happens? Where am I going to drive? What is my exit? Am I going to run on foot? All these things. You have equipment with you. You have safety gear. So you try to minimize the risk, but understand that when you do go out, that's where the good stories are. That's where the good video is. And so you do as much as you can to manage that risk and minimize it as much as you can.
Kiet, very quickly, this would be a time to tell them about what you did in school that scared the bejesus out of me in Professor Belchi.
So my claim to fame is back in March of 1999, while I was a student at a junior at San Jose State. Darla Belshi assigned me to go cover an urban warfare exercise. That is basically the Marine Corps was going to do a mock invasion of Monterey. And they were ready to do a full-blown press tour. And they had, they wanted to fly us out to their helicarrier off the coast of Monterey. And we did the tour, and as we came back, the helicopter caught fire. And I was rolling video the whole time. I have it right here. You guys ready? I'll let you, it's like a short clip. All right, here it is. This is taking this exercise. They've even hired actors to make this about as convincing as possible. For the Marines, this is as real as it gets. But as the duties and equipment change, it seems the more the everyday dangers stay the same. No one was injured during the urban warrior exercise, but it almost got off to a tragic start. A Marine helicopter with 13 journalists on board caught on fire just after takeoff from an aircraft carrier. As flames swept back through the CH-46 Sea Knight and dropped back on the deck. Only 2 people aboard suffered minor injuries, but the accident points out the hazards the men and women of our armed forces face every day. It proves that on or off the battlefield, fighting a war will always be dangerous. In Monterey, Kiet, Update News.
Now, Kiet, tell them how that story was picked up.
I was only one of 2 people who got video of that, and it made international news. I was getting calls from Network, from Today's Show, from Nightline. I got a call from Germany. It was pretty wild, you know, because it involved a military, a U.S. government military helicopter.
Now, I can see in the audience that the director of the school is here. Dr. West, you can only imagine that day when Professor Belchi and I went down to the director's office and said, so we have a student who almost got killed today. What should we do about this? Can you just very quickly, Phyllis, tell the class why that's a challenge in college, but that's an experience of a lifetime in the profession?
Well, it's great footage. You know, I mean, I think that's an incredible story to have on your portfolio, but I'm going to get sued. You know, your parents are going to call, your family, the university president. I'm flashing through my mind of all the things that happen. I once had a student when I was at my last university. He went and caught footage of actually a drug shootout. And he was so proud of it, but I was devastated. I'm like, oh my God, you were there? They confiscated, he said, I'm sorry, this is the reason his project was late. I'm sorry, the Memphis police confiscated my computer until they take the evidence off of it, but then I'll have the piece for you in a little bit. But oh my gosh, he had bullets flying and everything. He could have died in that. So that's the first thing you think of is, oh my gosh, that's a potential disaster for the university, but it's great portfolio material. I'm sure my kid went on to get a great job from that stuff, but didn't make me feel good at the time.
And it certainly made us nervous as faculty. We wanted to tell, well, I actually remember telling Kiet, that is fantastic. I'm going to kill you. Don't do that sort of thing. Your parents will think it's crazy. Damian Trujillo, you guys met, my class did earlier in the year.
It was going to catch on fire that day.
No,
I mean, nobody.
But just the idea of going up in a helicopter is not something that's a normal class assignment. So that was
but we were trying to win.
Well, very good. I was going to say to you, Damian Trujillo, also a student who graduated from our program, spoke to our class earlier this semester. He infiltrated a Mexican-American gang and did a story with the San Jose police chief during his time in my class when he was here. So students are always pushing the envelope, and I'm not encouraging you all to do crazy things. Never am I going to encourage that. But as Phyllis said, as Dr. West said, you do have to stand out in college, even during a pandemic. Hint, hint, Spartan Daily students, Update News students, hint, hint. Don't go crazy, but it never hurts to stand out. Other questions for our guests?
Can I pause 1 second? there's on the chat, there's talk about that being military propaganda. Can we just, I want to have you guys expand on that a little bit, because I think that's a fascinating discussion. I've never really thought of it that way.
Go ahead, folks, talk.
So I was the one who brought that up, and my family actually has a long military history. My uncle was a recruiter for the Army. He's been in the military in some capacity and for like 30 years. And one of the things he did was he was in the 82nd Airborne Division of the Army, and it was there's so much commercialization of our military, and no other country has commercials, literal, like Super Bowl commercials, asking you to join the military. And a lot of things that we do in our military are kind of shows of force, or you know, demonstrations of what our military can do. But other countries kind of play it close to the chest, because you don't want to be advertising your capabilities. But our country does it as kind of a method of recruitment.
No, I think if I were to approach the story today, you know, I wouldn't be a 24-year-old kid doing it, and I would look at it at a much different lens, for sure. And after everything that's happened in our country, yeah, I think that was a very young me approaching a story, and I would do that in a way different fashion now.
In the short time remaining, any questions for our guests about how diversity is represented, not only in news, but on television, on streaming sites? Quickly, any questions?
Yeah, Kiet and Devin, thank you so much for joining us today. I guess for me, this question's for Kiet. As an Asian American, there's not a lot of, you're starting to see it change with diversity in media. So who are some of your heroes in the Asian American, your reporters that you looked up to? And how did you use their how did you see them, and how did you acquire their skills to apply to your career?
There aren't a lot of Asian males reporters. I am one of 5 Vietnamese male reporters in the entire country. So there weren't a lot of people to look up to. But in my time, Ken Kashiwahara sticks out, because he was, you know, he's a Japanese man, but he was on the front lines in Vietnam. I also have a special connection with him because I won his scholarship. And it was just really nice to be able to see the ones that did succeed, to see them not portrayed in a way where they're speaking with a heavy accent, where they're emasculated in some way, where they are more than just an engineer or a doctor or somebody who's kind of meek and mild. And, you know, this is why we need representation, because I'm kind of like puzzled as to how I got into this, because I really didn't have a lot of role models in that regard. So I just kind of just winged it. And hopefully, you know, this will lead to more Asian males getting into the business, because, you know, we need representation.
Other questions?
So how does it feel being the role model for other people now, since you had none growing up and coming into this?
You know, I was at one event, and an older Vietnamese man stopped me, and he said, "Hey, I want to thank you for not changing your name, for sticking with a Vietnamese name and being out there in public." And I said, yeah, you know, like, it never occurred to me, but that was important to him, because now he said that whenever he sees me on TV, he's like, "Hey, look at that guy. He's Vietnamese. He's you know, one of us," or however he said it. And it makes me kind of proud, you know, because I feel like at least we're heading into a different phase where Asians are viewed in the media, where, for me, I have a lot of emotional baggage as to how Asian men were portrayed in media. And I feel like that's all behind us, more or less. And so the younger Asian men who are growing up now just don't have that in their heads, because people have gotten wiser and they're not portraying Asian men like that in the media. And so it gives me hope, you know, and it makes me really proud to be able to be, I guess, a role model, if you want to call it that.
And Devin, I want to go back to you. Go ahead.
Well, just to adapt that question to myself, I would say probably the 2 people whose work I really admired would have been Ed Bradley from 60 Minutes and Brian Gumbel. You know, I just thought that they were both consummate professionals, really, really good at what they did, kind of cool, you know. And so it always helps, I think, to have someone who has been a trailblazer to sort of show you what is within the realm of possibility. And just a really quick story. So most years, not every year, but oftentimes I will go to the Black Journalists, the annual convention that they held. And one year I met a woman who was retired now, but the first African-American woman on television in Boston. That year's convention happened to be in Boston. And whenever I visit other cities, I kind of channel surf so I can sort of see who's on their news and what's on their news. And what I noticed was a really visible lack of diversity in Boston television when I was there. And I talked to this woman and I said, you know, is it sort of dispiriting, a little bit disappointing that it seems like you blazed a trail that has since, you know, closed behind you? And she said, absolutely. And so it is incumbent upon each generation to continue down that path. The success of one generation does not, you know, guarantee the success of those in line behind them. I just think that's an important note to kind of underscore.
Devin, that's a good point. And I want to stay with you for a moment because there's one thing you didn't mention. You were in New Orleans when there was something called Katrina. And we all as a nation in the world got to see what was the aftermath. What were your experiences? Was that a bit of a daredevil time for you?
Yeah, I think one of the common threads with Kiet and I is that, you know, we get to be on the front lines of history. Sometimes that is chaotic. Sometimes that is downright dangerous. During Katrina, so my experience in a nutshell was that initially I was at a hospital that was across the parish lines. In Louisiana, they have parishes as opposed to counties, just across the Orleans parish line in Jefferson Parish. And that's where we were for the storm itself. We ended up getting trapped there for several days because there was floodwaters, you know, that didn't really allow us to leave that hospital. There were downed trees. Eventually, we had to figure out a way. A couple of days in, the hospital said, we did not anticipate you guys being here this long. We have a finite supply of food, and our patients are our priority. We're not kicking you out at this moment, but you need to plan to leave. And ultimately, we left in the middle of the night, kind of had to wind our way through streets that were, you know, pitch black, finding a route that was open, getting across the Huey P. Long Bridge, and eventually getting to Baton Rouge. Kind of established a base of command there and would drive in every day into the city to cover stories, you know, during that time. And it was a time when it was chaotic, when all of the systems of government, all of the pillars of society had basically crumbled, and you had to make your own way, 100%, every day, every moment of every day, because it was essentially lawless. You know, a lot of the police officers were scattered or evacuated themselves with their family, and there was civilian rescues, getting people out of areas that were flooded where they were stranded in homes. And it just, you could not, all of the places that you would look to under normal times for order, for assistance, you could not count on them, and you had to count on yourself.
We have about 8 minutes left in this first segment. Final questions from the class.
Have either of you ever worked internationally? And if you did, what was that like?
I think the short answer for both of us, since we've been friends for like 25 years and worked at 3 TV stations together, is no, unfortunately. I think that would be a great experience. I think that if you're fluent in a second language, that certainly opens more doors to you. If that's something that you would want to pursue, I would look to do it early in your career to establish yourself in that way. Because I think it becomes in some ways more challenging the deeper you would get into your career if you've worked principally domestically. But I think it'd be a great experience. I think one of the things that is of great benefit in this career is that almost inevitably it forces you to live in other parts of our country that you might not otherwise. Kit has been in New Mexico. I've been in New Orleans. We both worked in Atlanta before coming back here. And so I think all of those experiences, living in different communities with different perspectives, is certainly a benefit. And that's just exponentially true when you expand it to the rest of the world.
I did go to Mexico for a story for one day. So, but no, Devin's right. International reporting is a great way to very quickly add a lot of oomph to your portfolio. So if you can swing it, you might have to pay your own way, but you're going to get some amazing stories, and it's going to make you look more worldly, and really flesh out your resume if that's what you want to do.
Thank you.
Other questions?
My question is kind of related to that. Kit, we were able to see your video reel. Bob sent it to us, and it was very impressive. For the both of you, just for graduating students, what do you recommend that we put on our video reels and our resumes just to make us stand out amongst other candidates?
Variety. So they're going to want to see you in many different situations that you can handle different stories, because you kind of have to be a Swiss Army knife in your first job. You're not going to have the benefit of being a specialist. So you got to have to show a potential boss that you can do anything and everything. And so that goes from breaking news to general news to taking a very boring assignment and making it interesting and good TV. So keep it short, keep it punchy, keep it active. That's like a whole, I could teach a whole, couple of hours on just how to craft a resume reel. But that's kind of the short of it, is be able to show that you're very versatile.
I will say something. So you've probably heard that, a news director may only look at 30 seconds and then make a decision if they want to watch the next 30 seconds or the next minute. And I remember as a student, that feeling really profoundly unfair. I've given you the best 10 minutes that I've got, and you're only going to look at 30 seconds. Now, early in my career, my very first reporting job, I was an internal candidate at Channel 11. So I put together a tape, which has disappeared in the years since, which is good because it was awful. But it was good enough as an internal candidate to get me the job. When I was looking to put together the tape to get the second job, I really became a student of what made a good tape. And Kit and I were working at that station together at that time on the night shift. After the 11 o'clock news, we would grab the discarded resume tapes that had come to the station, all of the ones day after day that hit the discard pile for the news director. And we'd spend a couple of hours well past midnight watching these. And if you watch a lot, you kind of know in 30 seconds. So your first probably 30 seconds to minute and a half should be really compelling. News directors will want to see active, demonstrative live shots and stand-ups. And then, like Kit said, you want to show them kind of what you're able to do across a couple of different types of stories: a hard news story, breaking news story, and a feature story. But if there's something that you ultimately want to do, like you want to do sports eventually, or you really want to be a feature reporter, make sure you put that on there, and make sure that in those initial conversations, you're also telling them, hey, I can do anything and I'm willing to do anything, but this is ultimately where I, want my career to go. That's fine. Because I think, as long as you're not saying, well, I'm only going to do this, it's fine to tell that person, this is what I really love and this is what I would like to do more of, and begin to carve that niche out for yourself as you move forward.
Devin's got a really good point about the 30-second rule, and that the pile of VHS tapes that we would dig through, you saw exactly where the news director hit the eject button. And so you really only have 30 seconds or less to make an impression. So you really got to grab them. And so that's why a lot of these reels, you see montages off the top, 5 seconds, 4 seconds, where you're really grabbing their attention. So That's one technique. If you can clear that first 30-second hurdle, maybe you've bought yourself another minute or two. So make sure it gets better as you go.
And each of you get 30 seconds, no more. I'm talking about Kiet and Devin. 30 seconds and no more. Competition, should they be afraid of it or should they welcome it?
Competition refines the breed. It sharpens you. It makes you stronger. It makes you faster. It makes you nervous and anxious and scared. And it pushes you beyond your boundaries. Competition is good. You look at stations who are number one, they kind of get stagnant and they just don't, you kind of fall into a pattern. So embrace the competition, but don't be an a-hole about it. Just remember at the end of the day, you want to be a decent human being.
Why would you be afraid of competition? I mean, why would you not aspire to be the best that you can be? And here's the thing. Sometimes you win. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you stumble. Sometimes you fall. This is life, but you got to get back up. But like the one piece of advice that I give to students, because I think a lot of times students want to sort of be invisible. Like, I want to sit like near the middle back of the class and, say something every 3 weeks and keep my head down and just keep moving. But like, why would you not want to be excellent? Because if you strive for that, and even if you fall short, you probably have ended up being pretty damn good. But who wants to be in the middle of the pack? Why? Why would you aspire to that?
Good question. We're going to take a break and go to part 2 in just a second. I'm going to stop tape. I want to thank our guests for being here for part 1. More with our guests in just a moment.